Well, hello everyone and welcome to Gateway Conversations. It is wonderful to have you joining with us today, and I'm very blessed to have my very good friend Andy Galpin with us. So welcome, Andy. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks, Dan. The sky is blue, the sun is out, which means I'm in a good mood.
Definitely, definitely. Well, for those of you who have not met Andy before, Andy actually was part of City Life Church, where my wife Laura and I are the lead pastors. He came to the city of Portsmouth to study, and as a result, got connected with the church and journeyed with us for 3 years, and got involved in serving, volunteering, helping out in various areas with the technical side of things, very much involved in helping rebuild the website. There was a season that Andy led the student ministry as well, done a great job of doing that, and also became one of our first apprentice leaders, where he was able to sit around the table as we had some very serious conversations and key decision making, and so Andy was a part of that and was a tremendous blessing, bringing his unique perspective. He also was the events manager for our Gateway conference as well, and did a sterling job. And so when Andy moved on, we were really sad to see him go, but we were also really excited for what he was launching out into as he continued to grow and develop as a person. So Andy, tell us a little bit about life after you moved on from university. Tell us about what you studied at university, and then kind of what the pathway looked like after them up until more recently, what you've been doing.
Of course. Thanks, Dan, for that kind introduction. So I was down in Portsmouth studying electronic and telecommunications engineering, which sounds a bit of a mouthful, so I tend to shorten it these days to engineering, where I did some work. I also did a placement as part of my degree while I was there. And I don't know about you and kind of different phases of your life that you've gone through, but I got to the point during my studies that I realized, although I was studying to be an engineer, I didn't really want to be an engineer anymore. And it's those fun moments in our life that kind of pivot and change in the direction that we're heading. And that kind of sent me on a different track once I finished university into the world of consulting, which brought together the two things that I really enjoyed in the work that I did, both at City Life and in engineering and in studying. I loved problem solving, and that's what I liked about engineering, that we got to apply problem solving to lots of different problems. And then I got to do a lot of work with different people. I was very people focused in my role as student worker at City Life. And so bringing those two together led me to the world of consulting, which gets a bit of a bad rep that I think is a bit unfair these days, but it allows me to solve lots of different problems and have a very client-facing or people-focused role within those problems.
That's brilliant, Andy. Thanks for sharing and giving us a little bit of insight into that. And I know that we wanted to look at three key areas today in particular. And one of those areas that we're going to be talking about is purpose. And, you know, how do we know what our purpose is? I think, you know, from yourself, when you transitioned from university, obviously today in our day and age, there are so many thousands of options and different directions. You know, 100 years ago, you'd often follow the job of your father or your mother, and but it's a very different world that we live in, and often can be very confusing. Add into the mix the current season that we've been going through of this major change with COVID-19. I think it's put a lot of people in a real tailspin, because there's jobs that are no longer functioning the way they were. The world is forever changed from this moment. So just talk to us a little bit about, Andy, how you discovered your purpose And I know that there's an element that we're always in discovery, we're always kind of learning. But talk to us a little bit about how you found purpose in your workplace, and also with this kind of pivot that is you're shifting, which I'm sure we'll share a bit about as we go on in the broadcast.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a really good point you bring up around choice, that back in the day when my parents were growing up, they had slightly less choice, and maybe my grandparents even less choice then. And the problem with having lots of choice is human beings love lots of options, but actually research shows that the more options we're given, the less likely we are to make a decision, because we become worried that we will choose the wrong decision, and therefore we're immobilized by choice. I don't know if you've skimmed through on Netflix and just seen all these different options of different things to watch and got to the point where you're going, I don't know what to watch. There's just too many options. I can't decide. And we often kind of approach work a bit like that, and what our purpose is in life, by going, there's so many things that I could do, and that I'm also a bit crippled by that choice, and immobile and unable to make a decision. And it often falls from a bit of a false dichotomy that we present ourselves, that we have a single purpose in life, and that we are meant to know what that purpose is and have some kind of divine knowledge that comes to us to guide and direct our path in a single direction. And that's actually a wrong way of thinking about purpose, and a wrong way of thinking about work. Stanford School of Education actually did some research into this, and they found out that only 1 in 5 people believe they understand the purpose for their life, and that they only have one purpose. Which means if we all think we're like that 1 in 5 people, 80% of us out there are in this crippling decision where we don't actually know what we think our purpose is, and we feel like we should have that, and that should be clear in our lives. So we need to reframe that as a bit of a problem, and rather than seeing purpose as a starting point, we see that as a bit of an end point that we are working towards. And as we move through life, and as we try different options, taste and see what is good, that we find our purpose, and we discover that purpose on our journey and on that way. And there's been a couple of key things that I've done within my walk that's helped me get to that point within my life, that I feel I have an understanding of what I was meant to be doing at IBM while I was there in that season, and obviously the direction that I'm heading in next, that we can touch on later. And I think for me, it started with an exercise I did while I was at university, which was called a life plan. And it's something that Michael Hyatt, who's an author in the US, promotes quite highly. And it's this concept of just taking some time to pause and reflect, and looking at different aspects of your life, and considering where you're at the moment with them, and perhaps where you want to be. And it uses an exercise which sounds a bit morbid, but actually can be quite helpful. And it's imagining you're at your funeral, and you're writing a bit of a eulogy for different areas of your life. You might have your family there, your friends there, people from work, colleagues, and you take the time to reflect on, what do I want them to say about me at the end of my life? And that helps us set a bit of a destination on where we're going. And then we reflect on where we're at this moment in time, and what the gap is between those two realities. And that helps us really understand the steps that we may need to take to get from where we're at now to where we want to be, which provides us a little bit of direction in our life. It's not an exact science. It's not going to tell you exactly where to go. And it's not that this is never going to change. In fact, where you want to end up, and what you want people to say about you towards the end of your life, will change as your circumstances change. So for me, family is all about my parents and my siblings at the moment, because I'm not married, I don't have a partner. But if that happens in the future, my family and that perspective on family will change, and it will be oriented around, and perhaps me and my wife and our children, and what I want them to say at the end of my life. Equally, I may be focused in a specific role at work, or working for a specific company at the moment, and that might mean I want a specific outcome from that. That doesn't mean it won't change. I might do a different role. I might move to a different department in the work that I'm doing, and that can reshape and rechange what I want to be working towards and the vision that I want to have for that. So I found that exercise really helpful in just reflecting on those different areas and how to move forward within those different areas. And it's something I've advocated for in a slightly different way in the work I've done with IBM in leading some of our skills and knowledge practice, because it's a problem that I come across quite often. And it's funny, the similarities between work in the corporate world and also work in the kind of student world, in student work from my time at City Life, that a lot of the challenges students have was, I'm doing this degree, but I don't really know why I'm doing this degree or what I want to do next. And I'm on this continuous cycle of trying to work out what the next step in my life looks like. And the life plan is a great exercise to help you think about some of those things. The other exercise that I advocate for more in a bit of a corporate setting, which is a little bit easier, is just reflecting on the meaning of life for you and the meaning of work for you. And that can be really helpful because they don't always line up. And sometimes we have a bit of this inherent tension inside ourselves because we view work in one way and we view life in a very different way. We might view life to be more about family, spending time traveling and doing all these different things. And yet the work that we've chosen for ourselves has us working 60 hours a week. We're away from our family all the time and things like that. And there's this inherent tension that is going on inside us at a bit of a philosophical level, that this is what we're advocating for, but this is what we're aiming for in work. And by taking the time to step back and just reflect on, what does work really mean to me? And what does life really mean to me? And how do they align up together? And how do we find consistencies within that? That can be really helpful in working out, what direction am I heading in? And that's something that's always been really important to me. I may not know where my end goal is, where the destination is, but I do know what direction I'm heading in, and we can course correct as we go. And as I've been on my different journeys and moved through different seasons, that end destination or that heading that I've been on has changed and it's shifted in life. And that's fine, because we learn things on the way and we're able to adapt as we move through different things in life. And a good analogy for that is, think of it a bit like a compass that's pointing you in the right direction, rather than our GPS and our Google Maps and Waze that's telling us the destination is here and I've got to go X, Y, and Z to get there, rather than a compass that's sending us in the right direction. And as we explore on that journey, we get to know where we're going. And I think this is quite, sorry.
I think that's some really, really good insight, because the reality is, wouldn't it be great to know what the end destination looks like? We certainly often feel very confused, uncertain. We're like, God, if you can just show me, like, where is it we're heading? But with a compass, it's kind of progressive, isn't it? It's that journey, it's that adventure, it's that, step at a time. And as we step in, to whatever's next, then we find that the next part of the pathway appears. So that's a really helpful way of describing it, Andy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's quite nice if you subscribe to a more Christian worldview of things, because we don't have to spend too long thinking about that broader question of the meaning of life, because God gives us that, and that our kind of purpose here on earth is to glorify God and to serve him in whatever capacity that looks like. And that's really nice, because it means we can't fail to meet our purpose. We seek and serve God, and by doing that, we're fulfilling our ultimate purpose and our reason for being here, which I find is really nice, because it takes the pressure off. And if you view your purpose in life to be successful or to get lots of money, then there's always that pressure of trying to meet that expectation. Whereas the Christian worldview and Christian framework gives us that kind of release from that by serving God in whatever capacity that looks like, we are fulfilling the reason that we were created and our purpose in life. And then he gives us that free will and that element of free will to work out what that looks like in tandem with him. And that can look very different for Christians and for various different people in different stages of life, depending on the skills and the gifts that God has given us in each different season. But that ultimate purpose is quite clear and firm within our lives, which I find a big relief. Sometimes it removes some of the pressure that we place on ourselves in life.
That's great, Andy. You know, one of the things that this makes me think about is when I was younger, I used to enjoy doing dot to dot. Do you remember dot to dot, Andy? You'd get these, you know, different dots scattered over the white page, and they'd have different numbers. And to begin with, it didn't really look like anything. But as you began to join up the dots in a sequence, you began to see a picture. And this is how I kind of think about our life and our purpose, that at the beginning, we might see a lot of dots, not necessarily all of the dots, but we certainly see some clear markers. And as we begin to join them up, suddenly we're able to realize that everything that's happened to us in life is for a reason and a purpose. It can have a redeeming value, and we start to see. So even when I look back on my own life and, you know, career and things that I've done and things that perhaps were desirable and things that weren't very desirable, when you look back, you recognize, okay, I see how that taught me one thing, and, you know, this experience, you know, gave me a strength in another area, and that kind of helped open my eyes to kind of new possibilities in another area. And I think when we go through life, sometimes you shared about, you know, your experience with some of the students, and often there is a confusion about, like, even with doing a degree, they're like, I'm still not sure what I'm meant to do in my life, what my purpose is. But as we join those dots up, and as we reflect, I think it's a really powerful activity to be able to say, start with the end in mind. Look back, what do I want my legacy to be? I think that's something that's really powerful. Andy, talk to us a little bit about one of the points we wanted to talk about today is about ministry in a kind of traditional sense, and perhaps an unorthodox sense, and how this interacts with what we do with work, with study, with life. Often we like to kind of separate these things, but obviously the Christian worldview about how we view that is very different. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight into this area?
Yeah, so we still have a bit of a reminiscent of this idea that there is a sacred thing to do and a secular thing to do, and I see that at organizations like IBM, where I worked, where they saw faith as something that was separate and necessarily from the day-to-day workplace, whereas we have different things that have come in and become part of that. Faith was still very much something still on the edge and treated with a bit of caution, and we see this in the church, and I'm sure those of you who've been in the church a while may have been approached and said, have you thought about going into ministry? And I like to say to those people, I am in ministry, isn't it wonderful? And we confuse this idea of kind of paid ministry and paid gospel work in the form of kind of pastoral work or becoming a vicar or a missionary, with the act of ministry in general and serving God in what he's called us to do. And that role is incredibly important, and we need more people to go do that. But equally, we need good Christians and people in the workplace and in different spheres of society, in teaching, in hospitality, in business, and in government. We need that influence within our society, because if we are going to bring God's kingdom onto earth, if we're going to bring the culture of heaven down to earth, we can't put everyone in a church who cares greatly about that mission and that purpose, because we become too disconnected from the world we're trying to serve. And if we're trying to influence and change the world to restore it to how God originally created it to be, we need to see ourselves in ministry in those positions that have the influence to feed into that. And one reflection I have on the pandemic that we've all been going through in the past year, and feels like longer than that. I don't know about you, but 2020 kind of disappeared, and I kind of skipped from 19 to 21, which is a little bit weird. But one of the things I've kind of pulled from that, and I think we as a culture have really got behind, is the inherent value of all work. And this is something that we see in the Gospels and in the Bible revealed to us, that culture doesn't quite understand and hasn't understood, that by serving in a supermarket, by stacking the shelves and keeping the toilet roll on the shelves, that is equally as important as the Prime Minister trying to run the country and do the job, because he can say whatever he likes from the top. But if we've got no one to stack the shelves and put the toilet roll on the shelf, no one to drive the ambulances, no one to serve people as nurses and doctors in the NHS, then it doesn't matter what he says, we can't function as a society. So we've had a bit of a shift that we now appreciate some of those jobs that perhaps we perhaps took for granted. Those delivery drivers who bring us our Amazon parcels or deliver our groceries, all those different roles that we have in life are all inherently valuable, and they're valuable to God and they're valuable to us as society. And just because we don't financially value them in the same way as some other roles, we don't pay them as much, doesn't mean they are less valuable to us. So that can be really helpful in choosing the direction of work that you're doing, that you just have permission from a Christian worldview perspective to pursue what God is calling you into, whether that's being a barista, being a teacher, being a business executive, being in leadership in government, whatever that path is you feel you want to go into, or you feel God is calling you into, you have permission to do that. And we don't need to use the usual measures of success that our culture places on us, of kind of power and influence or money and kind of reputation that kind of comes with some of those roles and not others, because society doesn't value them in the same way that God does, and that we ultimately should do as human beings.
That's great. I think this is some really liberating insight here, Andy, because, you know, I know that particularly, you know, pastors, vicars, those in traditional ministry, we've often not been very helpful to the conversation where we have, you know, like you've said, you know, do you feel God's calling you into the ministry? The reality is, though, if you're a Christian, like the day you get saved, you are in ministry. And even with terms that we talk about with kind of almost like missionaries, you know, oh, do you feel called to the mission field? Well, the reality is that the day that that you commit your life to Christ, like you are on the mission field. We were all on the mission field to have a positive influence, to let the light shine, to help transform the world, to make it a better place. And so in a sense, it is a really releasing thing that when we realize, hey, we're all in ministry, we're all missionaries, but how that looks is going to be different for different people. And it's about finding what it is that's your pathway, how God has graced you, what God has, you know, endowed you with to make a positive difference in the earth. Talk to us a little bit about, Andy, your experience at IBM. Talk to us a little bit about how you lived out your faith, because you're very much a man who is a man who's able to really interact well in that kind of worldly environment, and completely agree with what you're saying about there's no divide between secular and sacred. It's like it's one, like our whole life is a spirit. Our whole life is part of our worship and our witness and discipleship. It's all one. But talk to us a little bit about how you lived out your Christian values in perhaps some environments and cultures where it was maybe perhaps at times the complete opposite to that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Couple of things that come to mind from that. So I obviously joined IBM, and it's not a Christian organization. It's a big American company, for those of you who aren't familiar, that works a lot in cloud, which is essentially tools like we're using today to record this conversation and to have this conversation and to broadcast it to your ears from where we are, and then in services, which is the side of the business I sat in. So my role was to be to go out to our different clients and to help them solve their problems. So I was focused on building better experiences, more meaningful experiences with our clients for both their employees, so people who worked in the organization, and their customers, so people like you on a day-to-day basis. So if you're an energy customer, which most of us will be, or if you have a mobile phone and you're kind of part of a mobile phone provider, I was involved in various different projects that hopefully make that experience just a little bit better and a little less stressful for you as a customer when you're going through that. and that approach doesn't require me to be a Christian, but how I choose to approach that work is changed by my worldview and by my understanding of faith and of God, and that I bring to that. And a really important guiding principle for me was I really felt God was calling me into leadership, to lead like Christ would lead in that place. Because I feel as a culture, we've had a bit of a crisis of leadership, that when we look to both the political sphere and the business sphere, we haven't necessarily had the leadership that's guided us well and moved us in the right direction and helped us through difficult times as a culture and as a community across the globe. So having that role and having that mantra was quite important for me. So looking at what leadership looked like for Christ, and that concept of servant leadership, that you don't necessarily have to be at the top of the pyramid to start leading, but we look at leadership more broadly as influence, as Maxwell did. And I know we looked at a lot of John Maxwell's leadership material while I was at CLC, and that gave me a really good foundation of understanding what Christian leadership looked like. So it meant from day one, I was approaching it from how can I serve, how can I support the people who are around me? And from day one, that was initially the graduate community. So I find that my skill set means I like to fill vacuums of leadership. So as you can imagine, at the start of a graduate scheme, you've got 30 graduates who are all kind of a bit worried about kind of starting in a new company for the first time, don't really know each other, and kind of don't kind of know the direction they're heading in, and are over aware of the impact and how they're being kind of perceived by the organization. And for me, that was a bit of a vacuum in leadership to kind of step into and go, how can I bring this community together? How can I help us connect as a cohort and share some of our struggles and the challenges of starting at a new company and organization, and build a bit of community around that? And we'll touch on it a bit later, but I've moved on from IBM now, and I'm going into I'm moving to America to study for a Masters of Business Administration, an MBA at the Kellogg School of Management. And again, we've come together as a community, and I've been connected with all the other admits who will be starting with me in September time, August, September time. And that's been a really great opportunity to go, well, we could wait till September to start connecting and building relationships with each other, or we can be a bit more intentional and start creating events and opportunities to connect together as a community and share some of this experience of navigating our moving a lot of our lives to the US. So 40% of the class will be international, coming from all sorts of different countries. So there has been another opportunity to step in and go, well, let's facilitate some of these connections. Let's organize some of these events that I don't have to do. I'm not getting paid to do it in either situation. It's separate from my day-to-day job, but it's an opportunity for me to lead in the way that Christ would and connect people together. So for me, it's my approach to leadership, and that was extended on the projects I worked with. And when I moved into managing teams, I was looking for how best I can support the individuals who I was working with. So I took every person I managed or kind of worked with on a project that I had responsibility for. I would take them out at the beginning of that relationship, spend some time understanding their goals, their ambitions, what they wanted from the role. And that didn't always line up with the role that they were there to do. So we looked at ways to find a compromise between that, to make sure the role that I needed them to fulfill on the project was going to deliver value for me and for the client and the project that we're working from, but also we could start opening up opportunities that closer aligned with what they wanted to get out of the work, and perhaps the skills and the ambitions that they had within that. So by taking that time and being quite intentional, it enables you to build relationships with people quickly and also serve them better as a leader in guiding them, because I know I can be aware of the opportunities that are coming up within the project, and also I can be aware of the stresses and strains of the industry. Because if you work in a quite a high stress environment, as consulting tends to be, that people adjust to that differently, and people also manage that in healthy and also unhealthy ways. So just being aware of people's well-being within that situation, and being able to step in and go, it looks like you're struggling. Let's take a step back. Let's reevaluate where we're at and how I can support you better in doing that. So
that's brilliant, Andy. I love the way that you have been representing Jesus in that environment, and coming from the angle of how can I serve, taking interest, seeking to bless. And I think this leans naturally into our next point as we look at Jesus being the ultimate model of what great leadership is all about. And obviously, there's no such thing as the perfect leader apart from Christ. To, our Christian perspective, we believe Jesus is the perfect leader. And I think his legacy and the fact that, how big the worldwide church is today is evidence of his great leadership. And one of the things that Jesus taught about was this whole notion, this idea of it's more blessed to give than to receive. Our stance in life isn't about coming to take whatever we can and just consume, and it's about me and what I want and my demands. But Jesus very much modeled selfless leadership and this whole picture of generosity. Andy, obviously being involved in the corporate world, and there's lots of money involved, there's multi-million pound deals going on. Talk to us just a little bit as we're coming into coming into land for our talk together. Just share a little bit about generosity, because I know that's one of your values that you love to live out. Talk to the people about what God's laid on your heart in this area.
Yeah, I know we haven't got long left, so I'll try and be quick, Dan. So for me, we have a really unhealthy relationship with money as a culture, and I think this gets in the way of a lot of things we do in life. So one of the really helpful reframes that I've done in my life is view money as a tool rather than an end game. So a lot of the challenges that we set ourselves, our definition of success is to get a lot of money, but having a lot of money doesn't actually do anything, because money in and of itself is borderline useless. We have to exchange it for things that we consider of value. And what's quite interesting is as you earn more money, you see people exchanging the more money that they have to have more time with their family. You might see executives going on private jets so they can cut their flights down from 5 hours to 4 hours, so they get 1 extra hour in their day, because time is ultimately our only resource that we can't buy and sell more of. So by reframing money as a tool, I find that quite helpful, because it means I'm looking at money as a way of sharing and navigating value in my life. And sometimes we are blessed with the market valuing jobs more than others. So consulting is an industry that pays rather well, and compared to kind of other vocations that are perhaps more have emerged as perhaps more valuable from a cultural perspective during the pandemic. So consulting pays a lot better than delivering parcels, for example, but that doesn't mean my work is more valuable than the work of someone else doing it, and therefore the person behind that is any less valuable than what they do. But if we aren't careful, when we have access to more finances and we're valued more, we can start to view ourselves as more valuable and view ourselves as more important as other people, and that's something that we need to guard against, the pride that starts to emerge from that. So I think Jesus sets us a really great example. He encourages us to be generous with our finances, and what that does, it just removes the power from money, because by giving it away, you actually get more satisfaction from what you do with that money than when you spend on yourself. So if you're a science or a research person, you can look at the research that people derive more satisfaction when they buy something for someone else than when they buy something for themselves. And that's a principle that I've absorbed from that perspective. And I went to a really helpful talk by an organization called Generous Journey, that's founded by one of the first employees of EA Games. So if you've ever played kind of FIFA or any of those type of games, he was one of the founding members of that. So when the company went public, he obviously earned quite a lot of money because he was a shareholder from that. And one of his principles has been to set a cap on your earnings. So look at what money comes in and set a cap on your lifestyle. So if I'm earning a kind of 40 grand, maybe my cap on my lifestyle is 30 grand, and I live within my means to £30,000, and then I give away anything that comes above that. And I found that really helpful as I progressed through my career, because it means my lifestyle isn't changing based on my income. Because one of the problems people have is as soon as they get a pay rise at work, that money very quickly disappears because you spend a little bit more, or maybe you eat out once more, or maybe you upgrade that car that you've got, or maybe you get a slightly bigger house, and suddenly your living is slightly better, but that money seems to have disappeared quite quickly. But by setting a cap on your living expenses, it means you're always living within that means, and you have an opportunity to give away anything above that. I also found it was really helpful in pursuing promotions at work and asking for pay rises, because it meant I wasn't asking that for myself, because I knew I'd set a bit of a cap on the amount that I would spend on myself, and I knew any more that would come in on that I could use to give away and to empower others. And I think the tools we have from a tax perspective are really effective. So if you're a higher rate taxpayer, if you give more money away, you can actually pay less tax, and you can redistribute that tax to causes that you care about and things that are important to you. So I found that really helpful, that I feel empowered to send that money to different places and different areas of both the society that we live in and also abroad, that money can be much more powerful in other people's lives than it is in mine.
Andy, that is super helpful. Love your heart. Love how you just unpacked generosity there, and some wise tools that can be used for living a generous lifestyle. Andy, it's been really great connecting with you and just learning from you. We are so proud of you in how God is using you, how you're really growing and developing. We'll obviously be cheering you on in this new exciting season as you look to transition to Chicago and the next phase, joining some more of the dots up in the picture that God has for you. Now, if people have any insight, we would love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your views about the conversation that we've had today. So if you've got thoughts around purpose, if you've got thoughts around, you know, this idea of kind of the divide between secular and sacred and kind of traditional ministry and kind of that kind of wider view of ministry, and of course on generosity, and what advice would you give about how we can live more generous lives, that's more about blessing rather than taking. So do drop those into the comments, and do share this video if you have found it helpful. Andy, if people want to connect with you, how would they best go about that?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on there, or on Twitter. That's probably the easiest thing. Andrew Galpin is where you'll find me.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, guys. Thank you for joining us, and we hope and pray that you have an amazing rest of your day. God bless you, and we will see you again soon.